Sounds like we're ready to go. Okay, he gave me the signal. Thank you very much. I'm Len Apcar, professor here at the Manship School. I think many of you know me. We're thrilled to have this panel here from the Times-Picayune Advocate to discuss this tragic, horrible, but spectacular piece of journalism covering an event in our own home region. But before we start, 14 people were killed in 15 seconds. We're going to talk about that and how that was reconstructed and reported. But before we start, I'd like to take 15 seconds of complete silence, just to center us to understand what we're talking about. So with that, I want to take a few minutes, take a few seconds actually, and that's what it took to kill 14 people and injure several dozen more in what was about 300 feet, did we say? How many feet? 1,000. About 1,000 feet. About 1,000 feet on Bourbon Street. So with, okay, phone, you've done your job. Thank you. I want to, the panel today will consist of each one of the reporters who all had separate responsibilities, broad as they were, to understand who attacked, how the attack was planned, what we knew about the attacker, and what the government, federal authorities, the FBI came in, the city, obviously the city police force and all, as they assembled this kind of body of information. What was so striking about this from a journalistic standpoint is that within 9 days, the paper and the Advocate was able to produce, and you'll see some of the front pages as they go through this, able to produce this unbelievable reconstruct written by 3 reporters and contributed to by about a dozen others. That reconstructed every hit, every minute of what happened with eyewitness accounts. I'm going to introduce the panel first. Jerry DiColo, who is the deputy editor for news, been at the Times-Picayune for 6 years. He was kind of the main quarterback for this whole effort. After Jerry speaks, Blake Patterson, an investigative reporter at the Advocate, who's been here 5 years. We'll talk about his role. He was, I think, the first reporter to get down onto the street, or nearly the first reporter to get down on the street early that morning. Andrea Gallo, to my right, is a senior editor for investigations, a Manship alum, and a Reveille chief editor back in 2013. She's frequently here at the school, so she's a good friend of the school and a common presence. And finally, Sam Carlin, also a Manship alum, whose job was to find out who the attacker was, who knew him, where did he come from, how did he plan it. So with that, I'd like to begin first with Jerry, and you can sit or you can stand.
Sure. No,
however you'd like to do it.
If y'all can hear me, it works. Before I start, so y'all are all student journalists? Yes? Okay. How many of you ever covered a crime scene? Just raise your hand. Just a couple? All right. How many of you have ever covered like a disaster or ever had to deal with anything like that? Just a couple. Cool. And how many of you, this gives us a sense of how entertaining we have to be. How many of you are required to be here versus chose to be here? Okay. All right. Mostly. Good to know. That's helpful. So I'm Jerry DiColo. I'm the deputy editor for news at the Times-Picayune and the Advocate. And what I'd like to start today with, and we'll have, I think, a good discussion here, is just to talk to you a little bit about those first moments, hours after 3:17 a.m. when we find out that a major attack has occurred in our city. So the points I want to get across before we kind of move on is, if you're an editor, if you're trying to run a newsroom and something like this happens, there's a few things you have to, your brain immediately goes to. First, get reporters on the ground. Like, we have to figure out what's happening. Like, I have to find humans to get to the place where something bad happened. We have to start figuring out how to organize ourselves, because this, almost immediately we knew that this was going to be a major news event that was going to take it was going to be like a whole newsroom event. And then how are we getting the information out to the public as clearly, concisely, accurately, and quickly as possible across all of our platforms, both social, print, website, everything. So those are the things that are going through my mind. Maybe it's worth it just to sort of give the story of like finding out this happened, right? So it's New Year's Eve at 3 a.m., which is maybe, one of the worst times for a news event to happen, because nobody's on. We're not, this is not, the Times-Picayune is not like the New York Times or Bloomberg. We're not a 24/7 news organization. We don't have someone sitting around the clock in Seoul or London waiting for something bad to happen. And so the way that I found out the news happened was I was actually away. I was on vacation at my parents' house in New Jersey, sleeping in my childhood bed, and my phone started going off. And I was like, oh, you ignore the first one because it's 3 a.m., and then you look at the second one. And it was the head of our subscriptions business, so not someone in the newsroom. I'm like, okay, why is Kyle calling me at this point? It was like 4 a.m. or 4:30 a.m. So I pick up the phone, and he's like, check your phone. And that's when I see that I'm getting text messages, text alerts from the city of New Orleans saying there's been a mass casualty event, please avoid Bourbon Street. So that's all we know, right? And I call Kyle and I say, who else have you talked to? And he said, you're the only person I've woken up so far. And so what in my head, I'm thinking, oh shit, right? Like, that means we can't get anybody awake. And so I go downstairs, open up the laptop, figure out what's going on. First push alert comes from Channel 4. So Channel 4, it's a local news station. We're the first ones on the ground, by far. Broke the news broadly and had someone live streaming what was going on behind the police tape. So I start immediately making calls, and up pops on Slack, to his great credit, a reporter named Ben Myers, who's our City Hall reporter, who says, I see it, I'm posting now, back read, right? So what that essentially meant is he immediately recognized the gravity of this, immediately recognized that we did not have anything on the website yet, and said, I am getting 2 sentences up. And that's exactly what he did. So I don't even think you can go back to that original post because that story was updated so often with changes in headlines and additions, but it almost certainly had a headline that said, mass casualty incident on Bourbon Street, please say to avoid area, because that's literally all we know. And so we post we post that up. I don't know what time it was. I did not have a single digital editor that I had roused yet, so I turned to Kyle, who used to run our digital desk, and said, do you still know how to do pushes? Do you still know how to put it on social? Do you still know how to change the website and give me a big banner head? He's like, I think I can figure it out, yeah. So we do that, and we get it out, and we're off to the races. Now we're covering a mass casualty event. Ben immediately runs, gets in his car, gets to the scene, and then I probably make somewhere between 30 to 50 calls in the next 15 minutes trying to wake as many people up as I possibly can. And for the first 15 or 20 minutes, I get no one. And that's, if it was 7 a.m., that would be weird, right? If it was 10 a.m., it would be really strange. At 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. or 4:30, whatever it was at that point, you're like, okay, just keep calling. And at that point, or around that point, Blake picked up. And so, what I've done now at that point the first of many jobs is now over. Get a piece of news out to people that says something happened, because that's literally all I know. I know something happened on Bourbon Street, and it sounds, based on the tenor of a 200 character text message, that is probably really bad. And so my job now is get as many people awake as possible and get as many people to the scene. And in the back of my head, I'm starting to think, all right, how do we organize that? But that's sort of the next step. So I'll turn it over to Blake and maybe just let him go through what he did in those first morning hours.
Gary, before you go, do you want to use any of these slides to illustrate what you just described?
I don't know. I kind of can't remember what the next slide is. So let's see.
These are the day-to-day coverage.
Yeah. Well, see if they pop up again.
This gives you a picture.
Oh, you know what? Let's stay on this one, and we'll come back to that, because I think that actually will be valuable a little bit later.
There is this moment, just to refresh your memory. This is a map, which I do want you to go over.
Yeah.
This is an incredible map of exactly point by point what happened in Blake's reconstruction story. And then these are the victims.
Yep.
So my entry into the story is, it's New Year's Day. I went to bed at 3 a.m. after a New Year's Eve party, and I wake up around 5:30 to a phone call from Jerry, which is unexpected, of course. And I'm hazy. 2 hours of sleep, somehow sober at that point, feel sober. Maybe there's some adrenaline that kicks in. Jerry says, tells me there's been a mass casualty event on Bourbon. That's all we really know. Ben Myers is out there. Can you get there? Asks if I've been up since 3 a.m. And I said, no, I'm good. I can go. I quickly just throw on some clothes. My car I had left at a friend's place where we had a house party. So luckily I live close to the quarter. So I just quickly biked over there. I get there around 6 o'clock. I'm not really thinking too much about where to park. I kind of just get there and see what I can see. And I kind of, coincidentally run up upon Ben, our colleague, who was outside the police headquarters waiting for a press conference. So I park my bike there. And Jerry's mandate to me was Ben has the officials covered, just try and find eyewitnesses, just try and find anyone, we really just don't even know what happened at this point, just try and get as much information as possible. So it was kind of a strange scene, because by 6 o'clock when I'm there, it had been almost 3 hours since the attack had happened. 7 blocks of Bourbon Street were cordoned off by the police. The side streets were cordoned off. There was no way, there was no getting to the crime scene itself. And by then, most of the people that were on the scene had gone home, had left, So it was really eerie, just tons of cops, tons of law enforcement, tons of media. And then you would just see people coming into work on Bourbon in the morning, not sure what happened and confused why they can't get to their job on Bourbon. So I just circled. What I ended up doing is just walking around Bourbon Street, the crime scene, 3 or 4 times, just looking for anybody. It was a ghost town. There was really nobody there. And I don't think I told Jerry this, but after about 3.5 hours or so, I was kind of not really getting anything, not really sure, what I'm contributing here.
Now by that time though, right, so Blake's on the ground. At the first news conference that Ben covers, we now know the story, right? So officialdom is where we're finding out what happened. Okay, there was a car, they believe it rammed through a number of people. we've posted that. Our digital team is now up. They're doing breakouts based on small pieces of information that are coming through, right? So we have a main bar story that's sort of sitting on the website. We have maybe some small points. What time did this happen? Oh, is Bourbon Street closed? What do we know and what we don't know? We're starting to build this out on the homepage. And so, we have now 3 lines of breaking coverage. We have officialdom, which Ben is doing on the ground with a photographer. We have Blake, who's on the ground. We have someone else that's been sent to the hospital, Missy Wilkinson. And we have our social team and our digital team scouring social media to try to find information there. So that's sort of where we are.
Yeah, and I was literally about to like text, one of the editors and be like, I'm not getting anything, like, I don't know what to do, or like, just kind of check in with them. And so I go back to where I parked my bike in front of the police headquarters, and I just kind of just sit there and wait, and just kind of look, and just, I probably stood there for like 5 or 10 minutes, just watching, observing, just seeing. And I see this kid, and he's like next to me, he's got like a hoodie on, he's got like, he's a teenager. He looks like a kid. He's got athletic shorts, he's wearing slippers, and he's just kind of like lingering around. And I kind of thought, well, maybe he's, coming to check out what happened. Like, he's kind of curious. And I don't really like approach him. And then I see him go up to a police officer, and I see her sort of give him the time of day, and like, okay, so something serious is here, and she's directing traffic, so she has to direct a car. And while she's distracted, I go up to him, and I'm just like, hey, I'm a reporter, like, were you there? And he tells me, yes, I was on Bourbon Street when the attack happened. My friend got hit, on Bourbon Street. And so, this is, by that point, we didn't really have a concrete sort of eyewitness. So I'm just like, okay, try to get as much information from him as possible. We're talking, he's telling me, he says he took cell phone video in the aftermath, and so he shares that with me. And I, quickly, just trying to get something up, I go to the beignet store next to the police headquarters, type up something, and send it to the newsroom. And you're not really thinking, like, you're kind of, it's a crazy scene, so I'm like, well, maybe I'll go find somebody else, I don't know. But I go back out there, and I just wait, and I see, and I'm expecting all these other TV reporters, it's swarming with media, I'm expecting them to, like, jump on this kid, like, we have an eyewitness, there's, this is what we're all looking for. And they're all, no one sort of catches on, and he's sort of just lingering there, and then he comes up to me and asks, if he could charge his phone. So I have my sort of portable charger, and we're just standing on the street corner, and his phone is dead, and he, it charges up, and I'm just sitting there texting with the newsroom, like trying to figure out what to do next. And when his phone turns back on, one of the first calls he makes is to his friend's mother to tell her that he saw his friend get killed on Bourbon Street, break the news to her that her daughter had died. And I'm standing there, my recorder is running, I'm just a passive observer. I'm capturing this conversation. It's on speakerphone between him and his friend's mother. And then, so at a certain point, Jerry tells me, like, this is your story. Like, you need to follow this kid. You need to tell his story. That is your assignment for today.
And yeah, and I think, maybe that's we'll come back to that, right?
Sure, yeah.
Because that leads into what is happening in the background right now. And maybe I'll send it over to Andrea shortly, because this is sort of where she comes into the role. At this point, it's probably like 8:30 in the morning. Everybody's awake, and everybody's like, holy shit, right? Like, if you work in a newsroom, when something like this happens, as soon as people realize it, like, a change comes over, and like every single person is like, what do I do? How do I do it? What do I do? Where do I go? And many of them just do it automatically, right? So people are just sort of Like, I'm finding out people are now just heading towards Bourbon Street. And at that point, as someone who's helping to organize coverage, we have to do is say, okay, stop. Where's everybody? What are our lines of stories that we're going to do? And so at 8:30, were you on that call? Yeah.
No.
Okay. So at 8:30, we have our editor's call, and we start saying, what are the lines of coverage? All right, there's the breaking news, there's the officialdom, there's the what's happening on the scene, there's the how did this happen, right? Which we're already starting to find out pieces of information because we're a local news source, that sources in public safety and stuff are texting us and being like, they didn't have the bollards up. The bollards are these things that are supposed to protect the street, right? So we're already trying to write stories that say, hey, it doesn't look like this was bad, but we maybe had some security failures here too. So there's that line of it. And then of course, there's the line of, which is critically important. It's who are the people that died, right? Who are the people that died? Can we tell their stories? Because people are interested in that, and who did this, and what is his backstory? So we are all trying to organize that at that point, and then, at that point, that's when other editors are sort of jumping in, and I'll, maybe Andrea can tell a little bit about what her role became.
Yeah, so can everybody hear me? By the time I came into this on New Year's morning, I looked at the website, my phone was blowing up, and I was blown away by how much had already been done and organized. And, I wasn't sure if I was going to have to kind of pivot to a breaking news role, because working in investigations, my job is usually more dissecting breaking news after the fact. But I texted Jerry and I was kind of like, put me in, coach. Where do you need me? How do you need me? So my first sort of assignment, like Jerry's saying, we're trying to cover all of our bases of all the different angles of this attack, was who is the person who committed this attack? Like, who did this and why did they do it and what do we know about them? So we normally have an investigative team of 4 people at the paper, and 2 of them were already on this. One of them, John Zimmerman, is also sort of our head of criminal justice coverage. So he had already been tapped to be handling what we call like the main bar for the day. Like, we knew he was gonna be writing the lead story of the day. So he's tied up doing that. We have a data editor, Jeff Adelson, who's tied up making maps and looking at Bourbon Street and plotting out how all of this happened. So the first thing that they do is they put me in charge of the attacker, and we have one reporter on our criminal justice team, Gabby, who is out in the field in New Orleans trying to get the name of the suspect. And I give her a call and I say, I'm gonna be working with you on this today. Let me know what you're finding out. We'll figure it out together. What I did not expect was that within like 15 to 30 minutes of me making that initial call to her, Gabby already had the name of the suspect. She got it through good sourcing, good beat work. She knows the police. She covers them day in and day out. So Gabby had the name. And it's still like we're scrambling, we're hazy. Nobody is 100% sure, like, what the full story is yet. And so I'm still sitting in my bed, like filing copy from my laptop in my bed. I'm on the phone with Gabby. She's giving me the name of the suspect. I'm asking her to double check her sourcing. I'm asking her to double check the name. I'm getting ready to post the story because she's out in the field and she doesn't have the ability to post it. And so I was like, let me make one quick call, because at this point, we know this is like an international news story, and we're going off of sources who we know who they are, but they're anonymous to the public because they can't be quoted yet. And we're gonna break the name of the suspect. And so if we're gonna do this, you always wanna be accurate, but especially when you're like making international news, you really wanna be accurate. So I make a call to John Zimmerman, and we go over the sourcing. He feels good about it. I feel good about it. We double check it. I'm on the phone with Gabby. She's worried that somebody's gonna scoop us, understandably. She's like, post it, post it. I post it. And we were the first people out with the name of the suspect, and it immediately just takes off. The story just went wild on our website and on social media. So as I'm working with Gabby to get the name of the suspect, I know that once we have the name, like, we're gonna need a lot of firepower to figure out who this person is, why did they come here, why did they do this. There's already all kinds of weird rumors flying around social media about the truck, about it being in Eagle Pass, Texas, about this potentially being committed by somebody who came over from the border. So I know we're gonna need firepower on it. So I text Sam and I text Joey, who's our other investigative reporter, and I say, hey, once we get the name of the suspect in this attack, can you like tap in and start backgrounding them and work with us on telling the story of who committed the attack? And I'll let Sam take it from there.
Yeah, I had a pretty similar experience to Blake in that I got woken up by an editor too early. Blake got a lot more sleep than I did. I woke up at like 9:30, so it actually wasn't that bad. But yeah, my assignment was essentially wait around until we have the name, and once we have the name of the guy, it was me and Joey Craney, both of us are investigative reporters, and have a little bit of experience kind of diving deep onto suspects and just characters. And so that was kind of our job. And first it was scouring the internet. I quickly found a YouTube video where the guy was kind of, I think this was in the interim between, we had the name internally, but we hadn't published it yet. And I think I found a YouTube video where the guy kind of was promoting a business, and he kind of sketched out his life story and his career. And crucially, that video told us he was in the military, which we didn't know yet. And that was going to be a big part of the suspect's story, is he was ex-military, which is quite common in these types of attacks. So I think there was some time where we were scouring the internet and trying to come up with as much as we could. And the way to do that, you can find a little bit on social media, maybe. I think I found a Facebook group of the guy's former high school classmates that was useful. I found a friend of his that I talked to there. But really what you want to do is go to like Nexus, and Nexus has addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, contact information, and crucially like locations the guy was associated with. So what I started doing was kind of plotting out this guy's life from every known address. And so I kind of built this map. I never published it anywhere. It was just for my own purposes. It was on like Google My Maps. But I started plotting out like, okay, this is the earliest known address for the guy. It's in Beaumont. Let me see who's living there now and call them. And I went and kind of meticulously called anyone I could find a number for, family members, friends, neighbors. So that was day one, and I think we got one big break that day. We found a couple old friends, but the guy had he grew up in Beaumont, he joined the Army, and then he kind of disappeared for 10 years. So a lot of the people who knew him in Beaumont hadn't really heard from him in a long time. And obviously he was living in Houston at the time of the attack. But I was scouring property records, and this was kind of the job. Me and Joey both were just kind of creatively trying to figure out, okay, what public data sources are out there where, I think went voter registration files and real estate licenses. The guy was in real estate, so there's a board that licenses realtors. But anyway, I found through property records, I went to the assessor's website and found the owner of his trailer. He lived in a trailer park in Houston. I found the owner of that trailer that he was renting from, who was his landlord. So I call up the landlord, and she hadn't been contacted by anyone yet. And I have a good 30-minute phone call with her where she's kind of telling me the guy's story. And this was very early on. We knew very little about the guy, so it was kind of a big break. So I'm talking to this lady, she's telling me, the guy was supposed to be moving to New Orleans. She actually got a call from another landlord in New Orleans asking for like a character reference, basically. And she's telling me all this information, and it's great stuff, and I'm kind of like gearing up to post something big, and then she has me on speakerphone, and I hear a knock on the door, and she's like, okay, hold on one sec, and then she opens the door, and I hear the FBI approach her and say, ma'am, who are you talking to? And she says, oh, I'm talking to the newspaper man. And they were like, hang that up right now. She hangs up on me, and I never heard from her again. I tried calling her, but by that point, luckily for me, I had 30 minutes of good interview notes. So that was kind of day one. I can either stop there. I'm happy. So basically, I reported all day. By 8 p.m., Andrea calls me. We had done, I thought, a pretty good profile of the guy for a first day. We had 9 hours of reporting. And then I think 8 p.m. or so, Andrea calls me and says, we need you to go to Houston tomorrow. And I spent the rest of the night planning, coordinating with my photographer when we were going to leave and how we were going to get there. So happy to launch into that Houston trip, or if you want to take a break and cover some other ground.
Yeah, I mean, maybe what we could talk about right now is, because that's basically the first day, right? Mm-hmm. And so what have we accomplished in the first day? We've gotten the entire newsroom roused and ready. On the website, we probably have 100 posts, right, of individual story files that exist, because when you're doing something, when you're making this type of coverage, we're trying to give people as many entry points as possible. It almost becomes a new fact as a new story, right? And so we have all of those stories. We have probably 30 to 50 people working in different various capacities when it comes to reporters and editors. We have a live updates file that's being managed by a digital editor that's kind of taking all of those posts and then summarizing them and getting them up in sort of a in a generally chronological order. We have people covering the different aspects, actually, oh, it fell off. Okay, that's all right. Those different areas, right? We have a team of people led by an editor trying to track down victims. We have Andrea's team that's trying to understand the suspect. We have Blake and a number of other reporters on the ground. We have our criminal justice reporters and our city reporters covering officialdom, which is where a lot of the information is getting. And then back in, the newsroom, which is largely virtual, in terms of what's happening that day. Some people have gone into the office at this point. I'm flying back to New Orleans from New Jersey. We have people that are writing the stories that are going to be in print, right? So we have all of our cross-platform things that we've been doing throughout the day, and now we have the stories that are going to be in print. So what do you do? How do you summarize all this? What do you want to do out of a first day? There's of course going to be a main bar. Sometimes it's called a lead-all, right? Which is going to sort of have the full tale of everything we know today, right? So we have one person writing that. It was Sim. And then you say, what else do we need to tell? Well, by Sam's great reporting, we have a nearly full story, or a very thick story, about who this guy was, which is kind of impressive on the first day, to say who this suspect is and have a little bit of his backstory. We are starting to learn some of the victims, but we don't have enough where we can sort of publish kind of what we would consider like essentially news obituaries about these people yet, right? And so what we're trying to show is that we have a big story that's very hard news and heavy focused. We have who did this, right? And then what we're trying to add to that, amid a bunch of other things like security and where the bulwark's working and all that sort of thing, is we want to show the pathos of this, right? We want to allow a reader to understand what this may have felt like to be on that street. And because Blake was there, that was his job today. I worked at Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal for a little while when I was younger, and I remember some advice that we had from a training session from a group of folks that had gone down to cover this massive earthquake that happened in Haiti, probably in like 2009 or 2010, I don't remember. And the editor that was there said, the trick to covering major disasters is when you find a story, you stay there. That's it. When you find the story, you stay there. So we had someone at officialdom covering City Hall. Blake found a story. He had a person that experienced this, that witnessed this, and he was able to tell that story in a way, and the kid's name was Zion Parsons, in a way that people would sort of understand the emotion of how this happened. He was able to do it in one day. And so that became sort of the package of stories that we were able to put together in a single day covering this. So I don't know if that's a good stopping point,
So,
Lynn.
well, let's just go over a couple of highlights. You had 5 channels, 1 breaking news, 2 officialdom, 3 security failure, 4 victims, 5 who did this, right? You've got Sam on the road to Houston and Beaumont, right? He had ties to Beaumont. But at one point, Blake sent me a note before the panel and said, Jerry pulled me into his office and said, your job for the next week is,
The TikTok. Yeah, well,
either one of you, describe it.
yeah, well,
I wasn't in the room.
Yeah. I just want to make 2 points. I think learned through this experience, that's good to keep your phone so that you can get a call from your editor, because that was good. And then I just want to circle back on one other thing, and that's like patience in reporting, where you may get somewhere and you may not see something immediately, or you may have struggled to find the information. Just waiting and just like standing there or just waiting it out. Like oftentimes it'll come, or sometimes it doesn't, but you get lucky with these sorts of things. So that's just, patience is really important. So after that first day, 14-hour day, the next day, get into the newsroom, sit down at my desk, start reading the paper, and 5 minutes in, Jerry calls me in his office and says, your job for the next week or the next couple days, or we didn't really put a timeline on it, was put together a second by second, minute by minute TikTok, we call it, like a clock, of, the attack itself. So, see what all the other reporters are putting out, get a spreadsheet, try and figure out the time it started, try and get all these times, and just organize everything you have, all the information you have. So, I was going through social media. I was grabbing every video I could find on social media, putting it into a Google Doc, saying, looks like it's at this location, looks like it's at this time, questions, like what do we don't know, and just try and organize, whatever we could find. And it became this newsroom-wide effort. I mean, if you guys read this 15-second stories, there's 4 people on the byline, about a dozen people contributing. This was a newsroom-wide effort, and drawing on the excellent reporting that all of my colleagues were doing over those next couple days.
Yeah. And what you have to do if you're going to endeavor to something like this, right? It's when you're writing stories, or when you're kind of building stories, as I try to explain it, right? You're doing like short-term, medium-term, long-term, right? There's little stories that you're doing every day. You're writing daily. So the whole team, some people are just sort of covering the news of the day. We're finding out more information. We're writing main bars every day. We're posting things throughout these first few days. Then there's another group of folks that are doing what I would call medium term, right? That's kind of what Sam ended up doing, and Andrea, which was saying like, go to Beaumont and in 2 days, tell me the story of this guy for our Sunday, by Sunday. And give me 50 inches on everything we can tell about this guy's life and what led him to this place. We have another team of people that are looking at the security issues, right? Because what we're starting to find out is that the street, though there had been in the past plans to armor it so that for this particular type of attack, that wasn't done. And so we were trying to say, well, why wasn't it done? Like, why? You guys have had plans in the past, so that meant, finding those plans and understanding, getting the documents, talking to the current informers that ran these things in the past, and then being able to do those stories on the medium term. And then there's the long term. But, in journalism, sometimes the long term is like 3 months. Sometimes it's like 2.5 years. Sometimes it's like as absolutely freaking fast as you possibly can do it that tells a full and complete story, do it. So, I asked Blake to do it. And the reason I asked Blake was because he was on the ground. He picked up the call, and wrote a good story the first day. And it was like, well, Blake can do this. So he's on it. And so what we did is we took Blake, we paired him with an editor on the environmental team named Mike Smith, We paired him with our data editor, Jeff Adelson, and we said, you guys are essentially the team to write this story. We need to write a definitive account on this as soon as we possibly can. Blake's job was to be the gatherer, right? To do all the reporting. In some ways, a story like this is a clip job, right? Like a lot of that stuff is being reported by the rest of the newsroom, and you're gathering it and compiling it. Part of it is seeking out, okay, well, there's a gap here, there's a gap here. We need this piece of information, we need that piece of information. And then part of it is the visuals and the things that you cannot get from officialdom. So Jeff's job, he's a Pulitzer Prize-winning data editor. His job was literally figure out how long this took. Like, that's it. Because no one's telling us it took 15 seconds, right? Like, the FBI hadn't figured that out. Nobody knows that. But that's important because it shows people that this happened so quickly that no one could react, that no one could respond, that in an instant, it went from kind of the hazy end of a long night, a fun night on Bourbon Street to absolute terror. And so he had to scour social media, walk up and down the block multiple times, get you were doing the same thing, get, closed circuit television, CCTV camera surveillance video from as many places as would give it to us, and had to try and he compiled like, okay, this says he turned, this camera says that at this point, minutes, seconds he turned. Okay, well, I can't trust the time stamp on that camera, right? Because they all could be 4 seconds off. So he's lining up literally along the block. Like, how long did it take? And if this pops up, I think y'all maybe saw that map. Our graphics editor is also looking and scouring all of these different angles, these different cameras, these different photo and social media to figure out where all this happened, right? So he turns on this corner of Bourbon Street. How was he able to go around there? Well, he was able to go around there because there was a police SUV and there wasn't a dump truck, which was what the plan had called for the past several years, but they didn't do it, right? So we have to be able to figure out, oh, well, he can drive around an SUV. There's enough room. There was like 11 or 12 feet around the outside. Okay, he goes around there. He drives over a wedge, right? This is a mechanical wedge that you can put in the middle of the street and it'll pop up and it'll stop cars and then you can put it down. But they didn't put it up. Guess what? That means it doesn't work. So Jabbar was able to just drive down Bourbon Street. The circles and the map show where he swerved, showing and demonstrating that he's swerving into people, right? Like, that's what the squiggliness of that means. The guy is actively trying to kill people. I mean, we know that, right? But that's a visceral representation of that, showing where the victims were, and any other information we can have. So my point in walking through all that, at least from the visuals and for the getting the 15 seconds, is that there's some cases in reporting where you are recreating a map that somebody hands you, right? Or there's a consultant's report or a security report, and you just say, oh, I have to make this look nice so that it's in our style. That's not this. What this was on the ground reporting to show our readers and the community for the first time how this horrible thing happened, because they weren't getting it from officialdom yet. I mean, they will at some point, I'm sure. And that's why it was really important.
Let me ask a couple questions that Sam mentioned before he arrived here. One is, you looked at a slew of video footage of the attack to assist in tracking down where and how exactly the assailant did damage, which I assume obviously informs this map. Where did you get the video footage? How many times, were you the only one who looked at it? Did other people look at it? How do you recreate this with either private video footage, were there any police cameras, anything else that, because one of the things that is quite striking is that several seconds go by once the pickup truck slams into this vehicle at the other end. The police aren't sure who's behind the wheel, what to do. Several seconds go by, and then there's a flash, he shoots, the assailant shoots, and then the police shoot a lot more. Quite a few, like 20 seconds, even longer than he drove, 20 seconds of bullets, is according to your reports. How do you know that?
Yeah, and so my primary job the entire time, like I said, was the suspect, but kind of this second wave of stories after the dust settled a little bit. Blake and Mike were kind of the leads on this, but I was brought in to help, see if you can track down exactly where everyone was hit on Bourbon Street. And it's something we're not going to know for sure until the FBI releases its crime scene report, which could take months or years. So I was brought in. Blake was actually the one, Blake and Jeff were the ones to kind of compile all this video footage. Some of it, I don't think we can say where we got it because the sources didn't want to be named. A lot of it, I'll say, businesses up and down Bourbon Street. It's a very, I'm sorry, I didn't silence my phone. Bourbon Street, that section of Bourbon Street, it's like restaurant, bar, restaurant, gift shop. And a lot of them have security footage from different vantage points. So Blake could probably speak a little bit more to it, but it was primarily security footage from restaurants and bars, and it was social media video, because a lot of people, for better or for worse, went out there with their cell phones, took videos. I think we confirmed where a police officer was shot by a social media video we saw, where we were about 99% sure that a police officer flying back right after the guy crashed was him getting shot by either the suspect or another police officer. So Blake could probably talk a little bit more about, exactly how we sourced it.
Yeah, I mean, so get this assignment from Jerry on the second day, the day after the attack. First thing, scour social media. Find every video you can, log it, okay? So that's, and that's available to everyone, basically. So we have that locked down. The next thing is that night, so Bourbon Street reopened to the public the next day. And, very eerie to be there the next day, right? There are a lot of people who were there the night of the attack that were back at work the next day, and a lot of people didn't want to talk, and that's understandable. I mean, you have to be sensitive in these situations and understand, and lead with, being human. You can't just go up and try and get information out of people without first acknowledging that they really went through a traumatic experience and that you are trying to tell this story. And so it's a sort of a dance to try and go the day after a terrorist attack to get information. So I want to make one point, which is that being there, with Sam talking to that landlord, and getting that information, there's a real value in sort of getting there before anyone else does or before the FBI does, because, my experience on Bourbon Street was after the first day, nobody really wanted to talk. International reporters, national reporters has swarmed the scene. They were bringing TV cameras up into people's faces. They were trying to get as much information as they could, and people were just tired. They did not want to relive this trauma, understandably. So that first day was fruitful for me as a reporter because we were the local, we were out there first, and we got a lot of eyewitness accounts from workers that day. So we got cell phone. So we got social media footage from some people. From Zion Parsons, he took cell phone footage, so that was helpful for us in recreating this, and he gave that to us very graciously. We had some other eyewitnesses there that gave us cell phone footage, and then Jeff Adelson, colleague on this story, I tried to get some businesses to give me surveillance footage. I couldn't really work it out any of them. He went later and I don't know how he did it, but he got a number of businesses to give us the footage on the condition that A, we don't publish where we got it from, and B, that we don't publish the footage of the carnage, which is Absolutely.
Which we wouldn't have done, right?
Which we wouldn't have done, right?
But they needed to hear that, right? Because they didn't, if you in a bar down there, you don't want it, you don't know what to expect, right? If you turn over your video to us and then it says, oh, X bar, like video of, people getting killed, like they don't want that. Like we don't want it either, but they don't know that, right? And so it's a process of talking to them and explaining to them what our goal is, why we want the video, how we're going to use it or not use it, right? Is this not for publication or publication? And going through that process with them so that they feel comfortable of giving it to us.
And this happens a lot, not just in a story like this, but in lots of different kinds of stories where you'll try and get information from sources. They will have some hesitancy about giving you that information, and you really have to lay it out for them and explain to them, like, what is the news value here? Like, why is this important that you give this to us? You make you kind of negotiate on that a little bit. So kind of explaining that to them, like they don't know, they don't know that it's not our intention to publish this. You have to make that explicit to them. So we got all that footage, we put it on a Google Drive, and then what we did is we got a couple reporters. I think that's where Sam jumped in, and that first weekend was just going through all the footage and documenting and trying to do block by block, like this footage from this angle, this footage from this angle, this is what we see, this is what we see. And Jeff did a really great job of, lining up the videos to try and, you could see a car go through, you could see it go through on this camera, and then it comes through on the next camera. And he really sort of mapped it out and got us to that 15-second number. But
the other thing that getting all that footage and going through it did was we knew that Blake was working on this, second by second account, but by looking through and reconstructing all of that footage, we also developed several other story ideas and follow-up ideas. Jeff, who we've been talking about, by looking at all of this, was able to see that Bourbon Street for those 3 blocks was completely unimpeded. There was nothing stopping Jabbar from driving down all 3 blocks. We didn't know that until we reviewed all of this footage. So that was another story that peeled out of all of this. I actually think we published that one before we published 15 Seconds, because we discovered that and it seemed newsworthy. Nobody else had verified that or published it. So that was another one that we found out by looking at it.
Right, and by doing that too, we were correcting misstatements that were made very early on by the New Orleans police superintendent, who said that there were SUVs blocking, blocking the street, and after looking at the footage, right, we went back to her and said, do you want to correct this statement? Because we can't see any SUVs there. And, we were able to, probably 3 or 4 or 5 days later, the 8th District Commander got on the phone with us and on the record said, no, we didn't have those on these streets. They were in these other places. And so the city that was not very willing to explain to us all of the security impediments that were in place compared to what were supposed to be in place, were then forced to give us that information because we had the physical evidence and the reporting to back up that this wasn't set up the way it should have been set up or was planned to be set up.
Before we go to questions, I have 2 little areas I want to probe just a bit. One is in the 15-second story, which if you haven't seen it yet, it's making its way around the room. There is beautiful detail of what people are wearing, where they're standing. There's even a scene, I think it's in that 15-second story, where somebody is giving chest compressions to a victim, trying to revive them, and they eventually are successful. I don't know if the person ended up living completely, but they get the person heart going again. It's literally going on the scene. That's in 15 seconds, I believe. How did you get that? How do you get that detail? How you didn't witness this, or did you see this in the surveillance video? How did you get that?
The chest compressions was in surveillance footage from, we got footage looking onto the 300 block, the intersection of between the 200 and 300 block. And so we could see, not only could we see the crash, or we see the car go by, we couldn't really see the crash site, but we saw all the aftermath. We saw the people, running along Musical Legends Park or whatever it is, the railing. We saw them jumping over bodies that were kind of lying on the ground, and that was really how we were able to tell that story. So that was really important in telling that piece.
You actually see in the surveillance video the police shooting of the attacker?
The day we planned to publish the story, we got they did the body cam footage, right?
Yeah.
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 So they
Body
published the
cam.
body.
They had body. They did publish it.
Yeah.
Chad Johnson, the security guard at the Prohibition Bar, comes in and out of the story. How did you find him?
That was the day Bourbon Street reopened. I went back out there. Just the first person I ran into who was trying to get me to go eat at some restaurant. I was like, "Do you know anyone that was there?" And he points me to this security guard who was at a different location than Prohibition. He was further down the block on this night that I spoke to him. And very willing to tell me what he saw. And, it was a really, impactful interview. And kind of what I'm saying is like, a lot of this is luck, but it's just like trying as many people as you can. I mean, I literally went up to every person outside of every bar and restaurant in those 300 blocks that next day, trying to see who would talk to me. A lot of people don't want to talk. That's understandable. But he was very open and told me what he saw and told me what he did. And I also spoke with his manager, who she didn't want her name in the story, but it was helpful to get corroborating view from the same location about what happened. So, yeah.
One last question before we throw it open to questions from the students. You have to tell a story. You've got all this reporting. Fabulous, massive, significant, heroic. How did you decide you were going to tell this story? And you open with Charlene Martin and this dress incident. How did you decide to do that?
Well, we wanted to do we wanted to make it chronological, right? We were telling a timeline. We were telling a TikTok here. We had all this information mapped out for each block, but we needed to start with something, that the lead sort of story came from another reporter, Josie. She got that, but you needed a lead, the top to really, encapsulate the sort of emotion of the beginning of him turning onto the block. Like, that's the start of the story here. But then after he does that, you need to take a step back. How did he get there? So, back to Houston, back to, all this great information we got from reporters like Sam and, information from the FBI. So that was sort of our thinking. I mean, you were definitely involved in thinking through the structure of the story. So
Yeah, you have to, a narrative like that in some ways is, if you have the reporting, the building of the story is a little bit easier because you kind of just go on a timeline, right? And to make it clear to the reader, you can only usually jump back in time once, like you have one chance to jump back, right? So what I was looking for in editing that story was, what is the earliest, most emotional piece that would grip the reader and bring them in? It has to be human. It has to be you look for totems, right? You look for things that people are holding or things that they're wearing, because that becomes it just becomes very concrete to the reader. And so when we had the dress, I was like, okay, bam, that's where you said it, because we know what this poor person was wearing. It was the kind of totem where it tells you that it was a wonderful night beforehand, and then it was terrible, And so, and it happened it happened at the beginning. So you could sort of, you knew you could start with that. Like as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh yeah, that's it. In fact, Mike knew what it was. He's like, yeah, that's it. You got to start with that. And so you write it from there. That's when the guy turns on the street. And then you go back in time for a little bit, and then you tell the story all the way through.
Let's take some questions from you all. There are some microphones floating around. If you have a hand up, see if you can get a mic's attention.
So obviously, if something's not crucial to the story, you're likely not going to include it. And if it's too gory, for lack of better terms, to include, you're not going to include it. But if something is simultaneously both crucial to the story, but also too gory to release to the public, how do you decide in what way to incorporate it, or whether or not to incorporate it at all into the story?
You, me?
You take it, Jerry.
Okay. There are well, first of all, we all talk about it. Like the editors sit there in a room and discuss it and say, is this worth it? There are very few scenarios right now that I can imagine where I am going to put, a dead body or someone bleeding out, like on my homepage or on the newspaper. Like, you just don't need to do it. And so, I think that what is important is making sure that you can describe in your words and pictures how terrible the moment was, right? And that, like, that's the level of sort of truthfulness that I'm getting at. Does my reader understand that this is horrible? And can I do that in a way that is not aimed at sort of shocking them? And that typically means that's something you're not showing. Now there are like examples where people have chosen otherwise. There's this, I think award-winning photo from the Ukraine war. I think Tyler Hicks shot it, which is like it's like the Russian soldier, like dead on the ground, like in the snow, right? Like that's a dead body. It's in a war, right? Like there's different choices that you're making there because of that. But we didn't need to do that. Like there wasn't a need to, so it would feel excessive to do so.
One other thing about that is that sometimes it can just be really important to have that stuff in your back pocket as a tool of verification and corroboration of what happened, as opposed to something that you're actually gonna publish. Like, I remember really early in the hours of this attack, we had a photo. I don't even really remember how we got it, but we had a photo of the suspect, Jabbar, dead in the middle of the street, bleeding out. And we were not going to publish that photo, but seeing him in that photo, he was wearing military gear. And that was kind of a key point in our reconstruction of who this guy was. He's a military veteran. I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of misinformation about him. He was an American citizen, born on US soil. That photo of him was not something we would publish, but it was something that helped corroborate who this guy was and gave us some details to include in a story about him.
More questions? Some up front.
I just wanted to ask, you had sort of touched on this, especially Andrea, sort of how you are able to balance making sure that your sources are reliable and coming from good sources, especially with social media and stuff, and also timeliness and making sure you're getting the story out there first. So really that was my question of how you went about doing that, especially on this project.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really difficult in this day and age, and I would just caution all of you, if you're ever in a situation where you're covering some huge breaking news event like this, just because you see something on social media, take a beat and try to verify as much as you can. Don't just say, well, this is on social, so we've got to grab it and we've got to publish it. In this case, we were talking about breaking the name of Jabbar, and we were going to do it on anonymous sources, but we knew who these sources were, and we had multiple people at the paper who had repeatedly sourced things from these people in the past. They felt comfortable with them. They had never been burned by them. If we had a situation where it was like, oh, this person told me, they say I can't publish their name, I've never spoken to this person before, then it's a little different. Luckily, we felt solid about our histories with these sources. And like I said, it's important to take that kind of beat. And in my mind, I felt solid with it, but I was like, let's run this past at least one more person before we put this out for the world to see, because this is a huge decision to make. So I wanted to bring another editor into it who also had experience working with these sources, who also agreed, yeah, we feel good about it. We all felt like we were on the same page, and we published. But yeah, it's so important to do that verification. I don't know if any of you also had anonymous sourcing issues as you were going about doing this.
No, I will say though, I mean, to your point, you got to remember, like, we're the local newspaper here in New Orleans, and there's 1,000 journalists flying from all over. I mean, within a few hours, there was journalists flying in from New York, from all over the world. We saw, BBC was there, all sorts of people were there. So the stakes are never higher than at that moment. So like, and I actually thought we did a really excellent job of staying ahead of, I wouldn't call us a small newspaper. We're a metro newspaper of like a mid-sized American city. We don't have the resources that like the New York Times has, right? Like when I went to Houston, the New York Times has reporters who live in Houston, and they know the city, and they know how to get around, and they know the cops there. They had, reporters who cover the FBI in Washington, D.C., and have, sources they've built up relationships with over time. That's just not something we have. We don't have reporters in D.C. covering the FBI. So all that to say, at the same time, a lot of those news outlets are kind of looking to us. So if we go out and get something wrong, like the guy's name or his background, or we misidentify or whatever it is, obviously we always want to be accurate. That's like our number one priority, but that would be a disaster. We would never let that happen. So that's why we go through all of these. We have conversations with, we had a ton of conversations the day of about what can we, because we had a name, and we found a bunch of information about a guy with the same name in Houston, and it's a pretty unique name for Houston. So, it's not like John Smith or anything. But at the same time, we had a lot of discussions around, okay, can we attribute this to our attacker, or, and so that was a work in progress all day, basically. But all that to say, a lot of work goes into, deciding when we have something we're willing to put our names in front of.
Other questions?
Hi, mostly for Sam. I'm just curious kind of what came out of that Houston trip in terms of obviously like talking to people he knew, but reports kind of emerged that he had sort of separated himself from social circles and family, and sort of like, what was it like trying to uncover that motive without sort of editorializing or making jumps that you're not qualified to make?
Yeah, it was a really difficult assignment in a number of ways. One is, like I mentioned, there were outlets from all over the world who had reporters there a good 12 hours before I was able to get there, including New York Times, Wall Street Journal. They have reporters who live in Houston. So it was hard for that reason. It was also hard, like Houston's a huge city. I also had 2 cities to go to. I had to go to Beaumont and Houston and kind of turn this around pretty quickly because we wanted to be ahead of everyone. And, a lot of you have probably spent time in Houston. When you have to drive all over the city to go to multiple locations, I mean, our entire day was driving. We were stuck in traffic for maybe 8 hours that trip. So it was difficult. My approach was, okay, create a map for my own use of every single location that he's ever been associated with it. And then on the drive over at 7 in the morning, as my photographer was driving, I was kind of color coding them of like, okay, these are high priority ones I need to hit immediately. And one of those was his brother's house. He has a little brother who's in his 20s who lives in Beaumont. And it was the very first stop we made. I stopped at the brother's house. He was in the garage. I approached him, and he was willing to chat with us. And we ended up talking for about an hour for an on-the-record interview. We got photos. We got some color from the scene. You know, part of it's a writing job when you go to a place, you know, on assignment in another city. So, frankly, I just got lucky. The first place I stopped happened to be this gold mine of information. The kid, you know, the guy was very generous with his time at a really distressing time when your older brother has been involved in something like this. So that was the big thing. We kind of lucked out there, and then spent the next day and a half traveling through Houston. We went to the guy's last known address at the trailer park. You know, there was about 100 media outlets with TV trucks lining the road. So it's kind of tough to find like the diamond in the rough at this neighborhood that, you know, every reporter in America has already canvassed. But to your point about there remained this sort of black box of even his neighbors in the trailer park didn't know him. There was a period of months where the guy clearly didn't talk to anyone, and the only way we were going to get at his motivations is like if we got access to his phone. So you reach a point where, you know, you can make some assumptions internally, but you're not going to be able to write what you really think happened there. So I got as close as I could to kind of tell him the story of everything I knew without, you know, making those leaps.
Yeah, and that's one I'd say we're still trying to piece together. I assume at some point the FBI will release more information, but after Sam went to Houston, maybe a week or two after that, he did another story looking at kind of how ISIS puts out these radicalization magazines and things, and how the attack sort of followed an ISIS playbook. And I thought that was a good follow-up. And the FBI has put out a little more information since then about him too. But yeah, some of it is, like Blake said, just being patient and waiting on answers, which we're still looking for.
Over in this corner.
Hi. I know, like, in the very beginning of the publication process, you were calling it a mass casualty occurrence or a mass casualty event. When was the first time you saw terrorist attack in the publications?
When the FBI called it a terror attack. In fact, they labeled it an act of terror, and I think that's when we did it. I mean, typically, AP style is not to call someone a terrorist, right? And so, you know, we typically allow the FBI to call something a terror attack as opposed to, you know, an attack or something like that.
Maybe time for one more, two more? Lots of questions up here in the center.
I don't know if this was necessarily y'all, but I noticed in general, like, the media kind of attached itself to Tiger Besh's story and, like, kind of used him as a representation for all the victims. So how do you balance, like, picking him as the representation and telling his story versus making it seem like you're not forgetting the other victims? You know what I mean? Like, how do you pick your front runner victim without disrespecting the other victims and, like, not telling their stories?
Well, they kind of pick themselves sometimes. Like, you know, we did. If you go to the next one, I mean, our goal was to tell the story of every one of these victims. Some of the families of these victims were very open to speaking with us. Others wanted nothing to do with that, or they had spoken to someone else and they were sick of telling the story, right? So you just don't know how people are going to respond. With Tiger's story, like, his family was open about it, right? Like, they were willing to sort of let people into their lives. He was a person also that sort of had, you know, he was a college football player, right? So, like, he had some level of, like, prominence in terms of people's minds, like, oh, okay, and his brother, you know, was playing at the Senior Bowl and things, so there became sort of like a natural progression of telling a little bit more of his story. But I think it's less of choosing one than, like, that person, like, that becomes an opportunity. They're willing to let you tell the story, and so you're able to tell the story.
Do you want to add anything else? Anybody? I think we're come to the end of the class periods for almost all your classes. So I want to thank our panelists from the Times-Picayune and the Advocate. They have been terrific. The story isn't over by any means. There's so many more threads to pull on. We wish you all the best. And thank you very much for giving us an hour and almost an hour and a half of, and from driving over from New Orleans, that lovely drive that we all know well. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you all for great questions. And with that, we'll conclude the Bourbon Street panel. Thank you.